I told myself I wasn't like the others. She said I was different too. But every man in that bar probably heard the same lines. Now I'm sitting here with nothing and I still miss her. Yeah, I should have listened. Kuya, you look sad tonight. That's what Janica said when she slid into the chair across from me at Club Paradise. I wasn't expecting anyone to notice. Hell, I wasn't even planning to stay long. I'm not sad, I told her, taking another sip of my San Miguel. Just tired. She smiled, this soft thing that made something in my chest loosen. Tired is just sad with better manners. I laughed despite myself. First real laugh I'd had since moving to Angeles City 3 weeks ago. I was 66, retired from 38 years fixing railway tracks in Queensland and sitting in a go-go bar at 11 p.m. on a Tuesday. Not exactly how I pictured my golden years. But the apartment was too quiet, and the expat bars were full of bitter old men complaining about their wives back home. At least here, the music was loud enough to drown out my thoughts. "You want another beer?" Janica asked. Her English was careful, measured. Not like the other girls who threw themselves at foreigners with rehearsed lines and grabbing hands. "You're not working very hard," I said, gesturing toward the other tables where girls were practically sitting in men's laps. She shrugged. "Maybe I don't need to work so hard tonight." There was something in the way she said it, like she was choosing me instead of hunting me. It felt different, special, even. I bought her a drink, then another. We talked about simple things, the weather, how long I'd been in town, where I was from. "Australia sounds beautiful," she said, resting her chin on her hand. "I always wanted to see kangaroos." I found myself describing the bush around Townsville, how the sunrise looked over the railway yards, how quiet mornings could be when you lived alone. She listened like it mattered, like I mattered. When the bar started closing, she touched my arm gently. "Maybe I see you again, Kuya." The way she said it, uncertain and hopeful, made me want to say yes before I'd even thought about it. That was 6 months ago. 6 months that changed everything I thought I knew about myself, about love, about what I was willing to sacrifice for the feeling of being needed again. I should have walked away that first night. Should have listened to the voice in my head that whispered warnings. Should have remembered that nothing good ever came easy, especially not for men like me in places like this. "I don't usually do this," Janica said on our third date, standing in my kitchen wearing one of my old work shirts. She was making coffee, moving around like she belonged there. "Do what?" I asked, though I was afraid to hear the answer. "Stay the night with customers." The word stung, but the way she looked at me when she said it made it hurt less. "You don't feel like a customer, Russell." 2 weeks later she had a toothbrush by my sink. 3 weeks, and she was cooking me breakfast every morning, eggs and rice, sometimes with little fish she bought from the market. "My mama taught me," she said when I complimented her cooking. She said the way to keep a good man is through his stomach. I was 50 pounds overweight and had been single for 8 years. No one had called me a good man in longer than I could remember. "My rent is due tomorrow," she mentioned one morning, not looking up from her coffee. "I'm short about 8,000 pesos. She said it casual, like mentioning the weather. I had the money. Hell, my pension went further here than it ever did back home. "How short?" I asked. "Maybe I can help." The smile she gave me could have powered the whole city. "Really? You would do that for me?" When she hugged me, I felt like a hero instead of a fool. "Barry, the old Brit who lived 2 floors down, cornered me at the market the next week. Saw you with that girl again," he said, adjusting his beer gut. "Pretty little thing." I nodded, proud even. "Janica. We're getting serious." Barry's laugh was sharp. "Serious? Mate, she works at Paradise. You know what that means, right?" I felt my jaw tighten. "She's trying to get out of that life." Barry shook his head. "They all are, mate. They're all trying to get out. Question is, are they taking you with them or taking you for everything you've got?" I walked away from that conversation, angry. Angry at Barry for not understanding. Angry at myself for letting his words get under my skin. Janica wasn't like that. She cooked for me, stayed with me, talked about dreams bigger than this place. "I want to study nursing," she told me that night as we lay in bed. "Maybe go to Manila for school. Start over." I stroked her hair, feeling useful, needed. "I could help with that," I said, "if you really want it." She rolled over to face me, eyes bright in the dark. You would do that? Help me study? I nodded. Of course. I believe in you. She kissed me then, soft and grateful, and I fell asleep thinking I was the luckiest man in Angela's city. I thought I was saving her. I didn't realize she was already saving herself, and I was just the latest installment in a payment plan I'd never agreed to. Where were you last night? I asked when Janica showed up at my door at noon, still wearing the same dress from 2 days ago. She looked tired, makeup smudged under her eyes. My Tita got sick, she said, dropping into my chair like her bones hurt. Had to take her to the hospital. I handed her a glass of water, watching her hands shake slightly as she drank. Is she okay? Janica nodded quickly. Yes, just stomach problems. You know how it is. I didn't know how it was. I didn't have family here, didn't understand the complex web of obligations that seemed to pull her away from me at random hours. But I wanted to understand, wanted to be part of whatever world she lived in when she wasn't with me. Next time, just call me, I said. I was worried. She looked at me like I'd said something surprising. You, worried about me. The vulnerability in her voice made my chest ache. Of course I worried. I care about you. 2 weeks later, it happened again. This time she was gone for 3 nights. I called, texted, even drove by the bar looking for her. Nothing. When she finally appeared, she had the same exhausted look, the same fragile explanation. My cousin's wedding. Family emergency. I told you, remember? I didn't remember, but I wanted to believe her. I needed to believe her. Your phone was buzzing all through dinner, I said one evening as we finished eating. She glanced at it, screen lighting up with a message. I caught a glimpse of the name, Gio, with a red heart emoji. My stomach dropped. Who's Gio? I tried to keep my voice casual, but something in her face shifted. Closed off. My cousin, she said, snatching the phone and turning it face down. He always texts stupid jokes. Cousin, I repeated. She was already standing, clearing plates with sharp, angry movements. Why you asking so many questions, Russell? You don't trust me? The hurt in her voice made me feel like the bad guy, like I was being paranoid and controlling. I do trust you, I said quickly. I don't like not knowing where you are. She softened then, came around the table to sit on my lap. I'm here now, she whispered, kissing my neck. That's what matters, right? But it wasn't what mattered. What mattered was the growing knot in my stomach every time she disappeared. What mattered was the way she could make me feel guilty for asking reasonable questions. What mattered was how she always needed money right after we had these conversations. There's a problem with some men, she told me a week later, tears in her eyes. From before. They say I owe them money. My blood went cold. What kind of men? She shook her head. Loan sharks. From when I first started working. Please, Russell. I just need 20,000 pesos. Then it's over. 20,000 pesos. About 500 Australian dollars. I had it. And the fear in her eyes looked real. The trembling in her hands felt genuine. Okay, I said, already reaching for my wallet. But after this, you come to me first if you need help. Promise me. She threw her arms around my neck, crying into my shoulder. Thank you. Thank you. I promise. After this, no more problems. I held her tight, feeling like her protector. Her savior. I should have felt like her Mark. You're different, Russell. Janica was running her fingers through my hair as I lay with my head in her lap. We'd just finished dinner, a real meal she'd cooked with ingredients we bought together at the market. For a moment, everything felt normal, domestic, real, different. How? I asked, though I was fishing for compliments. At 66, after 8 years of living alone, I needed to hear it. Other foreigners, they just want one thing, she said, her voice soft in the dim light of my apartment. They think Filipino girls are just toys. But you actually listen to me. You care about my dreams. She was quiet for a moment, then added, You make me feel like maybe I'm worth something more than this place. I turned to look up at her face. In the lamplight, she looked younger somehow. Vulnerable. You are worth more than this place, I said, meaning every word. You're smart, you're beautiful, you're kind. You could do anything you set your mind to. Her eyes filled with tears. You really believe that? I sat up, taking her face in my hands. I know it, and I want to help you get there. That's when I brought up Australia. I'd been thinking about it for weeks, lying awake at night, imagining what our life could look like. I've been looking into partner visas, I said carefully. It takes time, but if we're serious about this. She gasped, covering her mouth with both hands. You would do that? For me? The tears came then, real tears that she didn't try to hide. She threw herself into my arms, holding me so tight I could barely breathe. I love you, she whispered into my neck. I love you so much, Russell. Those words. God, those words. I'd forgotten what they felt like coming from someone who wasn't related to me. Someone who chose to say them. I love you too, I whispered back, and in that moment, I meant it more than I'd ever meant anything in my life. We made love that night with a tenderness that felt like promise, like future, like maybe all the loneliness and all the empty years had been leading to this. The next morning, she was already awake when I opened my eyes, sitting by the window with her phone. Good morning, beautiful, I said, stretching. She turned with a smile that could have stopped traffic. Good morning, my love. My love. The words made my chest warm. I was thinking, she said, coming back to bed. If I'm going to Australia with you, maybe I should get a new phone. This one is so old, and if we're going to be apart while we wait for the visa. I was already nodding before she finished the sentence. Of course she needed a new phone. Of course she needed to stay connected. What kind do you want? She kissed me softly. iPhone? If it's not too expensive? It wasn't about the money. It was about what the phone represented. Investment, commitment, proof that I was serious about our future together. Later that week, she needed help with her mother's medicine, then her little sister's school fees. Each request came with tears, with gratitude, with promises that this was the last time. Each payment I made felt like another thread binding us together. I wasn't just her boyfriend anymore. I was her lifeline, her way out, her future. I thought that made me special. I thought that made me irreplaceable. I was wrong about a lot of things back then, but I was especially wrong about that. I woke up to silence. That was the first sign something was wrong. Janica always made coffee in the morning, the old percolator bubbling and hissing on the stove. But my apartment was dead quiet, and when I reached across the bed, her side was cold, empty. Janica. I called out, but even as the word left my mouth, I knew she wasn't there. Her clothes were gone from the closet, her toothbrush, her makeup, the little stuffed elephant I'd bought her from a street vendor. All of it vanished like she'd never existed at all. I found a note on the kitchen counter, just 3 lines in her careful handwriting. Russell, I'm sorry. I have to go. Please don't look for me. That was it. After 6 months of I love you, and you're different, and let's go to Australia together, I got 3 sentences in empty drawers. I called her phone. Straight to voicemail. Texted her. The messages showed as delivered but never read. Her Facebook was deactivated. Her Instagram gone. It was like watching someone erase themselves from existence and taking a piece of me with them. I sat on my couch for hours, staring at the note, trying to make sense of it. Was she in danger? Had those loan sharks come back? Was she protecting me? By evening, I couldn't stand the not knowing. I drove to Paradise, my hands shaking on the steering wheel. The bar was busy, girls in bright dresses laughing with tourists and expats. I found Candy, one of the girls Janica sometimes talked to. Have you seen Janica? I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. Candy looked uncomfortable, glancing around like she was checking for escape routes. Oh, kuya, you didn't know? Know what? My voice came out sharper than I intended. Candy winced. She went back to Gio, her boyfriend. They left for Cebu yesterday. The world tilted sideways. Boyfriend? Candy's face went pale. Kuya, I'm sorry. I thought you knew she had a boyfriend. The music felt too loud, the lights too bright. Everything was spinning. How long? I managed. How long has she had a boyfriend? Since before she met you, Candy said quietly. They've been together 3 years, on and off, you know? She always goes back to him. I stumbled out of the bar, the humid night air hitting my face like a slap. 3 years. She'd had a boyfriend for 3 years, and I was just... What? A side hustle? A walking ATM? A convenience? I drove home in a daze, the streets of Angeles blurring past me like a fever dream. In my apartment, surrounded by the absence of her, I finally understood what everyone had been trying to tell me. Barry. The other expats. Even my own instincts. I'd been marked from the first night, chosen not because I was special, but because I was useful. Because I was lonely enough and rich enough and stupid enough to believe that a 26-year-old bar girl could fall in love with a 66-year-old railway mechanic from Queensland. I sat in my chair, holding her note, and for the first time in my adult life, I cried like a child. Not just for her, but for the version of myself I'd lost somewhere in those 6 months. The man who'd been careful with his heart, who'd learned hard lessons about trust and love and the difference between the two. She'd taken more than my money. She'd taken my dignity, my judgment, my ability to believe that someone could want me for who I was instead of what I could provide. And the worst part was, even knowing all of that, I still missed her laugh. I still missed the way she said my name. I still missed believing I was worth loving. 700,000 pesos. That's what I calculated sitting at my kitchen table with bank statements spread out like evidence of my own stupidity. 700,000 pesos over 6 months. Rent money, medical bills, phone payments, school fees, loan sharks, family emergencies. In Australian dollars, that was about $18,000. $18,000 I'd handed over without really questioning where it went or why it never seemed to be enough. My pension was supposed to last me 15 years in the Philippines. At the rate I was spending on Janica, I would have been broke in 3. But the money wasn't even the worst part. The worst part was looking back at texts I'd saved, messages I'd thought were love letters, and seeing them for what they really were. Thank you for helping with Mama's medicine, you are so kind. I'm so lucky to have someone who cares about my family. You make everything better, Russell. Generic. Careful. Calculated. I pulled up her message history and started reading from the beginning, looking for anything real. Anything that wasn't a request, or a thank you, or a manipulation wrapped in gratitude. The search results were devastating. 6 months of conversations, and I couldn't find a single message where she asked how I was feeling. Not one where she remembered something I'd told her about my life. Not one that was just about us, without money or favors or needs attached to it. I thought about what I'd given up to be here. My house in Townsville, small but paid off, with a view of the railway yards where I'd worked for 38 years. My Saturday morning coffee with Jim and Marcus, 2 other retired blokes who'd become my closest friends. The quiet dignity of a simple life where I knew who I was and what I was worth. I'd traded all of that for the illusion of being needed, of being important to someone young and beautiful. The cruelest part was realizing how isolated I'd become. I'd stopped hanging out with Barry because he asked too many questions about Janica. I'd stopped going to the expat meetups because I was too busy playing house with a woman who was probably laughing about me with her real boyfriend. I'd stopped living my own life because I was so desperate to be part of hers. I found an old photo on my phone from 3 months ago. Janica and me at a restaurant, her leaning into me while I smiled at the camera like I'd won the lottery. Looking at it now, I could see what I'd missed then. Her smile didn't reach her eyes. Her body language was perfect, practiced, professional. She looked like a woman doing her job and doing it well. I'd been paying for the performance of love without realizing that's all it was. The final insult was checking her social media one last time before it disappeared completely. Her last public post was from a week ago, a selfie with a young Filipino guy who looked nothing like a cousin. The caption read, "Back where I belong," with a location tag in Cebu. In the comments, friends were writing things like "finally," and "about time," and "I missed you two together." I'd never seen any of these people in her life when she was with me. It was like I'd been living in a parallel universe where I was the only one who didn't know the truth. That night, I sat in my empty apartment and faced the hardest truth of all. I hadn't just lost money or been lied to, I'd lost myself. The man who'd moved to the Philippines 6 months ago was careful, independent, self-respecting. The man sitting here now was broken, desperate, and humiliated. I'd let loneliness make me stupid, and love make me blind. And somewhere in Cebu, the woman I'd thought I was saving was probably planning her next move, her next mark, her next performance of affection for money. I wondered if she ever thought about me at all, or if I was already just another story to tell the next lonely foreigner who thought he was different. 3 weeks of silence, and I broke. I told myself I just needed closure, just needed to understand why she'd left without explanation, just needed to hear her voice one more time. At 2 in the morning, staring at my phone, I typed out a message. I still care. Can we talk? My finger hovered over the send button for 10 minutes before I pressed it. The message showed as delivered immediately, then read, then nothing. Days passed. I checked my phone every hour, pathetic and desperate and hating myself for it. I wrote 12 different follow-up messages and deleted them all. I practiced what I'd say if she called, rehearsing conversations that would never happen. I imagined her reading my message and feeling something, anything, for what we'd shared. On Thursday, 5 days after I'd sent the message, my phone buzzed. My heart jumped so hard I thought I might have a heart attack. But it wasn't a call, just a text. Short and final. Sorry, I'm with someone now. I never meant to hurt you. 20 words to end 6 months of what I'd thought was love. 20 words that confirmed everything I'd been afraid to admit to myself. I stared at that message for hours, reading it over and over, looking for hidden meaning that wasn't there. I never meant to hurt you. As if intention mattered when the result was the same. As if the pain was somehow less real because it wasn't deliberate. As if I was supposed to feel better knowing that my heartbreak was just collateral damage in whatever game she'd been playing. I typed back a dozen responses. Was any of it real? Did you ever care about me at all? How long were you lying? Do you know what you've done to me? But I didn't send any of them. What was the point? She was with Gio now, wherever they were, living their real life while I sat in Angeles City holding the pieces of a fantasy I'd built around a woman who'd never existed. 2 weeks later, curiosity and self-hatred drove me back to paradise. I told myself I was just getting dinner at the restaurant upstairs, but I knew why I was really there. I sat in the corner, nursing a beer, watching the door like a stalker. And then she walked in. Janica, wearing a new dress I'd never seen, laughing at something a young Filipino guy was whispering in her ear. Gio, I assumed, her real boyfriend, her real life. She looked happy. Genuinely happy in a way I'd never seen when she was with me. Relaxed, natural, like she could finally breathe. They sat at a table across the room, and I watched her transform into someone I didn't recognize. Playful, spontaneous, alive. This wasn't the careful, grateful woman who'd lived in my apartment. This was the real Janica, the one who'd been hidden behind the performance she'd given me. Our eyes met across the room, and for a moment, time stopped. I saw recognition flash across her face, followed immediately by something else. Not guilt or regret or sadness. Just nothing. Blank politeness, like I was a stranger she'd bumped into at the grocery store. She whispered something to Gio, and they moved to a different table where I couldn't see them. I finished my beer and left without saying a word. What was there to say? That she'd broken my heart? That she'd ruined my faith in love? That she'd taken my money and my dignity and left me empty? None of that would change anything. None of that would make her care. I was already part of her past, forgotten and irrelevant. A chapter in her story that she'd closed without looking back. Walking home through the humid Angeles night, I finally understood something that should have been obvious from the beginning. I'd never been her boyfriend. I'd been her job, and she'd done her job well, professionally, efficiently. The problem wasn't that she'd lied to me. The problem was that I'd been so desperate to believe those lies that I'd helped her tell them. I'd been complicit in my own destruction, and that was the hardest truth to swallow. I found the video on my phone 3 days later, buried in a folder I'd forgotten existed. Janica at someone's birthday party, dancing to a Tagalog song I didn't understand. She was wearing the blue dress I'd bought her, spinning and laughing with a group of girls I'd never met. I must have recorded it without thinking, just another happy memory to save for later. Now it felt like evidence from a crime scene. Watching her in that video, I tried to remember what I'd been thinking when I filmed it. Probably something about how lucky I was to have found her, how beautiful she looked, how proud I was to be with her. But looking at it now, with everything I knew, I saw something different. She was performing even then, even at a party with her friends. Every movement was calculated, every smile perfectly timed. She knew I was watching, knew I was recording, and she was giving me exactly what I wanted to see. The worst part was how happy she looked. Not fake happy, not polite happy, but genuinely joyful. Dancing with people who knew the real her, speaking in her native language, being herself without translation or explanation. I'd thought she was happy with me, but this was different. This was the happiness of someone who didn't have to pretend. I paused the video on her face mid-laugh and studied it for what felt like hours. This woman, this stranger who looked like Janica but moved like someone I'd never met, had been living in my apartment for 6 months. Eating my food, sleeping in my bed, taking my money, and performing love so convincingly that I'd started planning a future around her. The skill it must have taken, the dedication, the sheer acting ability, it was almost impressive. That's when the real truth hit me. Not that she'd lied to me, not that she'd used me, but that I'd wanted to be used. I'd known, somewhere deep down, that our relationship didn't make sense. A 26-year-old bar girl falling for a 66-year-old retired railway worker? Come on. But I'd ignored every warning sign because being needed felt better than being alone. Being useful felt better than being invisible. I thought about all the times I'd told people back home about my girlfriend in the Philippines. The pride in my voice, the way I'd described her as if she was a prize I'd won. My neighbors, my old workmates, they'd probably just nodded politely while thinking what Barry had eventually said out loud. You know what this is, mate? But I hadn't wanted to know. I'd wanted to believe in the fairy tale. The cruelest realization was that she'd probably been kind to me, in her way. She could have taken more money, could have disappeared sooner, could have been cruel when she left. Instead, she'd given me 6 months of feeling important, feeling loved, feeling like maybe my lonely life had purpose. The fact that it was all an act didn't change how it had felt in the moment. And maybe that was enough. Maybe that was all anyone ever really got, moments of feeling loved, regardless of whether the love was real. I deleted the video. Not out of anger, but out of something like mercy. For her, for me, for the memory of who I'd been when I thought I was happy. Then I sat in my chair and admitted something I'd been fighting for weeks. I missed her. Not the real Janica, whoever that was, but the woman who'd cooked me breakfast and called me kuya and made me feel like I mattered. I missed the illusion she'd created, even knowing it was false. I missed being the kind of man who could believe in love at first sight, who could trust without question, who could hope without fear. That was the truth that hurt the most. Not that she'd lied to me, but that she'd made me lie to myself. And part of me, the pathetic, lonely part that had driven me to Angela's city in the first place, was grateful for the lie, because for 6 months, I'd felt alive again. And now, sitting in my empty apartment with my broken heart and my wounded pride, I wasn't sure if feeling nothing was really better than feeling everything, even if everything turned out to be nothing at all. I started packing on a Tuesday morning, methodically folding clothes I'd bought for dates I'd thought mattered. The suitcases were the same ones I'd brought from Townsville 8 months ago, full of hope and retirement dreams and stupid optimism. Now they felt like coffins for the man I'd been before I met Janica, before I learned that loneliness could make you stupid enough to believe anything. You leaving Angeles? Barry asked when he saw me loading my car. He didn't look surprised. Probably half the expats in this building had watched the same story play out with different actors. Yeah, I said, not offering details he didn't need. Time to move on. Barry nodded, understanding everything I wasn't saying. Where to? I shrugged. Somewhere, without ghosts. I drove through the city one last time, past the bar where I'd met her, past the restaurant where she'd told me she loved me, past the market where we'd bought groceries like a real couple. None of it looked the same anymore. The magic was gone, replaced by the clear, harsh light of reality. This was just another city where lonely men came to buy the illusion of love from women who'd learned to sell it professionally. At a red light, I pulled out my phone and opened the expat forum I'd been lurking in for months. Guys sharing stories, asking advice, warning each other about girls and bars and scams. I'd always thought I was above their bitter warnings, smarter than their mistakes. Now I had a story of my own to tell. I typed carefully. Don't ignore the signs. If she makes you feel like a savior, you're probably the prey. The responses came quickly. Been there, brother. How much did it cost you? Welcome to the club nobody wants to join. But mixed in with the cynicism were newer guys, fresh arrivals asking the same questions I'd asked 8 months ago. Looking for hope, for possibility, for reasons to believe their situations were different. I recognized myself in their desperate optimism and felt something like pity. I drove north toward Baguio, into the mountains where the air was cooler and the tourists were different. Families instead of sex tourists. Couples instead of predators and prey. I rented a small apartment overlooking the valley and spent my first night there sitting on the balcony, drinking coffee and trying to remember who I'd been before I let a beautiful woman convince me I was worth loving. The truth was, I'd never really known who I was. 38 years fixing railway tracks, 8 years of retirement routine, and then this. I'd defined myself by my work, then by my solitude, then by Janica's need for me. But stripped of all that, sitting alone in a mountain town where nobody knew my story, I had to figure out what was left. Just Russell. 66 years old, moderately comfortable, embarrassingly naive, and finally, starting to learn. I opened my laptop and started writing. Not about Janica specifically, but about loneliness and the things it makes you do. About pride and how it can blind you to obvious truths. About the difference between being loved and being useful, and why one feels so much like the other when you're desperate enough. The words came slowly at first, then faster, like bleeding out poison. That night, I slept better than I had in months. Not because the pain was gone, but because I'd finally stopped fighting it. Janica had used me, yes, but I'd used her too, as a mirror that reflected back a version of myself I wanted to believe in. We'd both gotten something out of the transaction, even if neither of us had been honest about what it was. The difference was, she'd known what she was doing. I'd just been stumbling around in the dark, grateful for any light that would have me. In the morning, I made my own coffee and ate my own breakfast, and started the slow work of rebuilding a life that didn't depend on anyone else's performance of caring. It wasn't much, but it was real, and after 6 months of living in a beautiful lie, real felt like enough. It's been a year now since I drove away from Angeles City. A year of mountain mornings and quiet evenings and the strange peace that comes from accepting your own foolishness. I don't think about Janica every day anymore, but she visits my dreams sometimes. Not the real her, whoever that was, but the version of her that lived in my apartment and made me feel important. In my dreams, she's still cooking breakfast and calling me kuya and telling me I'm different from all the others. I wake up from those dreams confused for a moment, reaching for someone who was never really there. Then reality settles in, and with it, something that might eventually become wisdom. I don't hate her anymore. How can you hate someone for being exactly what they said they were? She never claimed to be anything other than a bar girl looking for a way out. I was the one who decided that made her a victim instead of a professional. Sometimes I wonder if she thinks about me at all. If she remembers the railway stories I told her, or the way I laughed at her jokes, or how proud I looked when I introduced her to people as my girlfriend. Probably not. I was one of many, a stepping stone in a longer journey toward whatever life she was really trying to build. But for 6 months, I mattered to someone, even if it was only because I was useful. That has to count for something. I've learned things about myself this year that I wish I'd known earlier. That loneliness makes you stupid, but it also makes you human. That the need to be needed is stronger than the need to be loved, and more dangerous. That there's a difference between being alone and being lonely, and most of my problems came from confusing the two. I'm alone now. But I'm not lonely. I'm just present. Here. Dealing with what is, instead of dreaming about what could be. I still live in Baguio, in my small apartment with the mountain view. I've made a few friends, other retirees who've learned to be careful with their hearts and generous with their friendship. We play cards on Thursday nights and complain about our arthritis and share stories we probably shouldn't. None of them ask about my time in Angeles City, and I don't volunteer the information. Some wounds heal better in private. I've started volunteering at a local school, helping kids with basic English. It's good work, honest work, and it reminds me that being useful doesn't always have to come with a price tag attached. The children don't want anything from me except patience and knowledge, and I have plenty of both to give. When they smile at me, it's because I've helped them understand something, not because they need money for their mother's medicine. Last month, I got a message on Facebook from someone I didn't recognize. A young woman in Angeles City asking if I was the Russell who used to date Janica. My blood went cold. I almost deleted it without responding, but curiosity won. Yes, I wrote back. Why? Her response came quickly. She talks about you sometimes, says you were kind to her, thought you should know. I stared at that message for hours, unsure how to feel. Part of me wanted to ask what she said, wanted to know if any of it had been real for her. But I didn't. Some questions are better left unanswered, and some closures are more painful than the wounds they're meant to heal. I just wrote back, "Thank you for telling me. I hope she's well." And I meant it. Despite everything, despite the money and the lies and the humiliation, I hope she found whatever she was looking for. The hardest lesson I've learned is that love, real love, isn't about feeling needed or important or special. It's about seeing someone clearly, flaws and all, and choosing them anyway. I never saw Janica clearly. I saw what I wanted to see, what I needed to see, what made me feel better about myself. And she saw me clearly too. Saw my loneliness, my desperation, my willingness to pay for the performance of affection. We were both getting exactly what we needed from each other, just not what we claimed to want. I don't regret going to the Philippines. I don't even regret meeting Janica. Those 6 months taught me more about myself than the previous 66 years combined. They taught me that dignity matters more than comfort, that being alone is better than being used, and that the most dangerous lies are the ones we tell ourselves. They taught me that I'm stronger than I thought, more foolish than I'd admitted, and capable of surviving heartbreak that felt like it would kill me. People ask me sometimes if I'll ever date again, ever open my heart to someone new. The honest answer is, I don't know. The idea terrifies me now in ways it never did before. But terror isn't the same as impossibility, and time has a way of softening even the sharpest lessons. Maybe someday I'll meet someone who wants me for who I am, instead of what I can provide. Maybe someday I'll be brave enough to trust that feeling again. For now, I wake up each morning and make my own coffee, and watch the sun rise over the mountains. I read books and write letters and help children learn English words they'll use to build better lives than their parents had. I'm 67 years old, wiser than I was, poorer in some ways but richer in others. I have my dignity back, my independence, and something that might eventually become peace. I still dream about her smile sometimes. But when I wake up, I don't reach for my phone to call a number that no longer exists. I don't check social media for glimpses of a life I was never really part of. I just lie there for a moment, missing what never was, and then I get up and start another day of living with what is. It's not the life I planned, but it's mine. And after everything I've been through, everything I've learned about love and lies and the difference between the two, that feels like enough. The truth is, everyone warned me about dating a bar girl in Angeles City. Everyone told me it would end badly, that I was being used, that I was setting myself up for heartbreak. And they were right. But knowing something and feeling it are different things entirely. Sometimes you have to touch the fire to understand that it burns. Sometimes you have to lose everything to realize what you never really had. Sometimes you have to break your own heart to learn how to protect it. I should have listened to the warnings. But if I had, I never would have learned who I really was underneath all the loneliness and need and desperate hope. I never would have discovered that I was stronger than I thought, more resilient than I'd imagined, more capable of surviving my own mistakes than I'd ever believed possible. The price was high, $18,000, 6 months of my life, and illusions I'd held about love and worth and what it means to matter to someone. But the education was worth something too. So yes, I should have listened, but I'm glad I didn't, because now I know who I am when everything else falls away. Now I know the difference between being loved and being needed, between connection and transaction, between someone who wants you and someone who wants what you can give them. Now I know that the most important relationship you'll ever have is the one with yourself, and that no one else can save you from your own loneliness. You have to do that work yourself. I'm still doing that work, one mountain morning at a time. And maybe that's enough. Maybe that's everything.